Just waiting for our writers to come in. Hi, Victoria. Hi, Nikki.
Hi. Hi.
Hi.
Hi.
Hello all. Thank you ever so much for joining us. I just want to do a quick introduction. Thank you everybody who's watching as well. This is our 4th panel discussion for Writing Around the Kids. Just to give you a bit of information about what the project is, Writing Around the Kids is a project for mothers of young children so that they can connect with writing creatively. Earlier this year, we had a fantastic group of writers in Crawley, and we're currently working with a brilliant group of women in Littlehampton in partnership with Littlehampton Museum and New Writing South. And we're soon to start our next writing group in Hastings. Both Sam and I are writers ourselves and mothers, and we began the project having recognised in our own lives how difficult it is to forge time to be creative for yourself. My name's Anna Jefferson. I'm a playwright and novelist. I've written for stage and screen since 2005. I've published 2 novels, Winging It, which came out last November, and Nailing It, which was published in April this year, and both with Orion. And I'm currently working on my 3rd novel.
And I'm Sam Johnson, and I'm a freelance writer. I got an MA in creative writing from the University of Brighton. I've been facilitating creative writing workshops since 2017. I've got poetry published in a couple of anthologies, and I've had work in the Brighton Fringe Festival. And I'm slowly writing a novel, in between having children.
And we're delighted to welcome you tonight to our Writing and Motherhood panel discussion. And this is with our 3 exceptional female writers who've kindly agreed to share with us their experiences of what it is to be a writer.
So I'd like to introduce Victoria Scott. Victoria's been a journalist for more than 2 decades, working in a wide variety of outlets, including BBC and Al Jazeera. Alongside her love of telling real-life stories, she's always written fiction, penning plays, stories and poems ever since she first worked out how to use her parents' electric typewriter. Victoria is a Faber Academy graduate, and she has a degree in English from King's College London and a postgraduate diploma in broadcast journalism from City University London. She lives near London with her husband and 2 children and works as a freelance journalist, media trainer and journalism tutor. Very, very busy lady. Her debut novel, Patience, was inspired by her sister Claire, who was one of the first people in the UK to be diagnosed with Rett syndrome.
Welcome, Victoria. And I would like to introduce Susan. Susan Allott grew up on the south coast of England, then moved north to study English at the University in Leeds. In her late 20s, she travelled to Australia, where she found work and settled for a while, despite her overwhelming homesickness. When she eventually returned to the UK, by a strange coincidence, she met an Australian man who she went on to marry. Susan's debut novel, The Silence, is a literary thriller set in Australia, in which she tackles some of the issues around migration, colonialism, that have been nagging her since her time there when she was in Sydney. The Silence was longlisted for the CWA New Blood Dagger Awards in 2021 and was described by Wall Street Journal as emotionally wrenching. Susan is currently working on a 2nd novel and is supporting emerging writers as a mentor. She lives in South London with her children and her very Australian husband. Welcome, Susan.
Thank you.
And last but not least, I'd like to introduce Nikki Smith. Hi, Nikki.
Hi.
Nikki studied English literature at Birmingham University before pursuing a career in finance, where she worked for a variety of companies, including an investment bank and a trampoline park. Following a now or never moment, she applied for a Curtis Brown creative course, where she started writing her debut novel, the psychological suspense thriller All in Her Head, which went on to be signed by Orion in a 2-book deal. Her 2nd novel, Look What You Made Me Do, was published in April 21. Both books have been bestsellers on Amazon, and All in Her Head has been optioned for television. She lives near Guildford with her husband, 2 teenage daughters, and a cat who thinks it's a dog. Hi, Nikki.
Hi.
Hi, also, we're going to start off by asking you some quick fire questions to get us warmed up. So the first is, so don't think about it, we just need the first thing that comes into your head. So the first question is, what book would you take to a desert island? So Victoria, if we start with you. Oh, I think Victoria might have frozen. Okay, Nikki, let's start with you then.
I'd take The Secret History by Donna Tartt.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
And why would that be?
It's, I think, probably the best thriller I've ever read. I love her use of language. Her kind of characterization is brilliant. And the plot, it's just one of those books that I could read again and again and again to try and kind of work out how she did it, kind of thing. So yeah, that would be my choice.
Fantastic, good choice. Susan, how about you?
So I would take the Norton Anthology of English Literature because it's that big. I don't know if you guys who studied English have got it. The paper's really wafer thin, and I'm never going to read it otherwise. It's got everything in it. It's got the wasteland in it and everything that I've never read that I should have. So that should keep me busy, I think.
Time and space on your desert island to read it. Brilliant. Yeah. Thank you. And finally, Victoria, what would your book be that you took to take you to your desert island?
So I thought about this long and hard, and in the end I decided I'd take one of my daughter's homemade books. She draws little pictures and writes little stories for me, and I would, just for sentimental reasons, I'd love to say I'd take that anthology, Susan, but I just don't know even if being on a desert island would
just
make
use
you
it
want
for
to
the fire.
Yeah. I don't know.
I love that question because you come up with such different answers. It's fascinating. So our next quick fire one is, which author would you like to come to your dinner party and why? Susan, can I ask you that first?
Oh, good. I'm glad I'm first because otherwise someone else would take this one. I want to bring Val McDermott. I think she just sounds like she's got so many good yarns in her, hasn't she? She'd be great fun. And I kind of admire her.
Brilliant. And Victoria, would you still Susan's guest?
No, although I think she is super cool.
Yeah.
I would go for Jodi Picoult because I've loved her books since I was I guess in my late teens when she first started writing, and I feel like we've got a lot in common in terms of the way we write books and the way we research them and the topics we write about. So I'd love to get some of her amazing experience and see if it would rub off on me. So yeah, I'd have her.
Brilliant. Thanks. And Nikki?
I'd ask Louise Candlish. I think she's a brilliant thriller writer at the top of her game. But I heard her speak on a panel once, and I was just really impressed with her honesty and resilience. And I think she'd be really interesting to kind of talk to and get to know.
Brilliant, thank you.
Our final quick question, and this was actually one that came from our Littlehampton group, which is, do you have any unusual habits or rituals, the things that you need to do before you start writing? And if I start this time with Victoria.
I think I just clean the house. That's really normal, isn't it? You know, before I feel like I can write, my space has to be tidy and clean. So I use that as an excuse to procrastinate and clean everything and chuck stuff in the recycling and do the washing. So usually when I sit down, I'm accompanied by the dishwasher running, the washing machine on, and the robot hoovers going around the floor, because it's how I need to prepare.
How about you, Nikki? What do you do before you sit down to your...
Just grab a very large cup of coffee. Or tea, either, but yeah, always have to have kind of a cup of coffee or a tea before I start writing.
So hot.
And my house definitely doesn't have to be clean. And it's not, so yeah.
What about you, Susan? What do you do?
Yeah, same as Victoria, except it's not so much cleaning, just to sort of declutter. As long as I can't see the mess, that's all I care about.
Yeah.
And I've got the dishwasher on, the washing machine on, and anything that just kind of looks like it might distract me, you know, like that letter that I really need to deal with or whatever like that, I just put it where I can't see it. I call it crap corner. I've got like an area of the kitchen where I just put everything
It's
that
like
I have
the
to deal
drawer,
with
isn't
later.
it? You shove everything in.
Yeah. Oh, and I need a cup of tea as well.
Thank you.
Oh yeah, no, I have
Yeah.
a big steaming cup of tea or something.
Yeah.
Yeah, as well.
So semi-tidy houses or very tidy houses, hot drink, and you're good to go.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Okay, so we asked our Little Hampton writer group what they would like to ask of you, and we've collated some of those questions. In terms of everybody who is watching as well, if you have questions that you would like to ask, if instead of putting them in the chat, if you could put them in the Q&A, and we will either get to them at the end or we might pick them up as we go along, but please ask questions, because this is meant to be interactive, and so everybody gets a chance to ask things of our fabulous writers. So I will ask the first question that we had, and also please all dive in. I'll kind of direct it to somebody at the beginning, but please all kind of chip in, which is probably the pinnacle question, which is, how do you carve out time around the kids from a practical viewpoint? I know everybody's got different age children, but what do you do to be able to kind of create space that is just for you to write? And Nikki, if I could start with you.
Okay. I mean, my children are now, I've got two girls, teenagers, they're 14 and 16 now. So they're kind of quite old, I guess, for kids, and relatively independent in some ways. But when I started writing, obviously they were a lot younger. They weren't completely babies, but they were probably kind of, 5 and 7, something like that. And I think, I mean, at the time, the biggest thing that I did, I was working full time, and I just got up really, really early. I'm a morning person, I think, anyway. I think once it gets past about 9 o'clock, my brain doesn't really function that well. So, so I kind of just made that decision that that's what I was going to do. And I got up at kind of 5 most mornings, but that wasn't really until they were a little bit older, and they were kind of into a routine pattern with school and stuff like that. I just used to get up, a couple of hours before they did, and then write then, and that was my kind of quiet time. The house was quiet generally, unless somebody had woken up, but generally quiet, and I can just sit there and dedicate myself to kind of writing. I was trying to write my first book, so that's when I got the words down, and then really just grabbing those kind of in little tiny pockets of time, and I think everybody will Susie will probably talk about this. I know her kids are a similar age. There's a lot of taxi driving involved when the kids get older, to various different kind of events, and whether it's a ballet class or a gym class or whatever, there's a lot of kind of driving and sitting around and waiting. So I kind of grabbed those periods of time as well, and just used to write on my phone. I think that's how I couldn't be bothered to kind of, take a laptop out with me and, whatever, but I could still just write on my notes on my phone or just on emails, and then email it back to myself and then stick it back into my document. So yes, so that's how I did it.
Is that something that chimes with you then, Susan, with having kind of children of a similar age?
I mean, it all sounds so familiar. One of the things that I did when they were really little was I signed up for like a correspondence course with a mentor who I would send her a chunk of my work, and she would reply and give me some thoughts, and I would send it back to her again, and that kind of helped me to make a commitment to my writing. And I found it easier to say, oh, I just need to take an hour because I've got to do that thing for my mentor, rather than just sort of going, I just want to write. And so that was something that helped. I also did a couple of retreats. I think the first one, the kids were probably like 4 and 5 by the time I did that. And I went away for a weekend. That was a really big deal. And I remember right up to the last minute thinking, I'm not going to be able to go. And I eventually managed to go, and thank God I did, because it made a really big difference. But yeah, other than that, it was a lot of what Nikki mentioned about just finding pockets of time. I used to have this really tiny little laptop that I could stand on the kitchen counter, and I could write whilst I was cooking tea. And you know, I remember I learned how to zone out CBeebies. None of this perfect silence, you know, just kind of like block it all out, to the point that they could be calling me and I'd be what? Because I was kind of lost, you know.
That sounds really familiar. I have discovered really randomly that I can write really well on aeroplanes, like busy, full aeroplanes, where I'm sitting, you know, with a laptop on my knee and the chair in front of me is really close, and I don't know. It's so strange because it shouldn't be that way. My brain seems to work quite well, and I think that might be partly because, you know, I've learned to do, you know, to work around the kids. My desk is in the corner of the kitchen, and I use Google Docs to write my novels, so I have them everywhere because I just have to log into Google on any computer or my phone or my laptop, or I'm at work. So basically I sort of sometimes I just leave the Google Doc open on my computer, and I'll be sort of in the middle of cooking and I'll go and sit down and type for 10 minutes, and then I go back and do something else. And my children are younger. My youngest daughter's 7, my son's 11, and I started writing Patience, my first novel, when Ella was tiny. And I think I've learned from that, because I used to snatch the time when she was having her little naps when she was a newborn, and then I used to use the 2 hours when she had the lunchtime nap, just the 1 nap a day. And I used to go, like, I'd literally put her down and be like a starting gun had gone off, and I'd run downstairs and sit down in front of the computer, you know, and see how much I could get written in that time. And I also got really good at writing in the evening. I'm in awe of Nikki. I can't get up early. I have done it for work, you know, as a journalist I do, but I hate it. And I would never do it voluntarily. So I'm more of a sort of a sit up and do it. And, you know, like those hours, I would put my kids to bed at 7 when they were little, and then I'd have 3 hours maybe. And so I'd make sure I ate before that, because my husband was away for work a lot. So when he was away, I would just use those 3 hours. And I didn't, thinking back, I mean, I don't tend to do that now. I think maybe it's an age thing. I feel knackered by about sort of 8 o'clock. But back then I was really motivated because it was time for me and it made me feel better. So actually it didn't seem like work, it felt like fun. And but I agree with Susan, especially now that they've got a bit older. I do also do things like I take my laptop everywhere. It's in my work bag, it's in my bag that I just take out. And I'm not very good at typing on my phone, but I'll sit in the car waiting for my daughter at ballet, and I get half an hour every Saturday morning when I feel bad because the other mums and dads too are standing there just chatting. I'm like, gotta go, and I run back to the car and sit there for half an hour typing. But it's really useful time, because I've made it sort of has to be. And I also find if I've got loads of time, got a whole day off maybe, and the kids are at school, I can't get much done. Because I'm so used to sandwiching it into small bits.
And I think, as you say, Victoria, it is that kind of giving up things as well. So it is like taking that opportunity, you know, not to necessarily stand and chat when everyone else is at a ballet lesson or whatever, or, you know, missing whatever is on TV that night, whatever it is. It's amazing how many words that you can write in an hour. It might not be very good words, but you can write them, you know, in an hour, and you can just see it coming along kind of slowly up to my, you know, that kind of 80,000 word goal. So
there's what, like 115,000 words or something in Patience, 120 maybe, and I wrote them all in bits. Like I didn't have, you know, long periods of time where I was busy looking after kids, was busy working and stuff, and it hopefully you read it doesn't feel like that, but you know, it was just a very present part of my life. I
feel like we're verging into territory, which is into my next question, actually. So,
okay, go for it.
Just pause you for a second, and I'll just ask this one. Is around planning. So it's kind of like how do you start writing when you've got a book? Do you just have the idea and run with it, or is it, you know, meticulously planned out? So you know, if you're talking about Google Docs and things, it'd be easy to kind of transport that plan around with you, I guess. So mine's
in Google Sheets. I have a spreadsheet with just a skeleton idea for each novel. Yeah.
I use Scrivener,
Yeah.
which is like another kind of project for writers, and so you get a corkboard view where you can kind of color code your chapters, and it helps you to sort of be able to visualize the whole novel. I'm not a great planner. I do sort of try and plan, but then I never stick to the plan. But it makes me feel better to feel like I've done a bit of planning.
Also, because you're writing, crime, aren't you? And I think I'm in awe of people who write really good crime plots, because they're so meticulous, aren't they? So difficult, because you've got all sorts of things that have to happen, and then you don't want to create something that isn't really, couldn't. I don't know what do I mean? So it has to work. I guess is all I'm saying. And I can imagine loads of plots don't work for crime.
I like to think my plots work.
They do work. They do work.
Yeah,
but it's hard plotting crime. I reckon that's what
it is hard. Yeah, it is hard.
On
Nikki,
I do mine on a spreadsheet. I was going to say, I didn't know for my first novel. I think because for my debut, All in Her Head, I think that I'd thought about it for so long, and it had been in my head for so long, that effectively I'd planned it, but I just didn't realise that I'd planned it, kind of thing. But for my next one, I did have to plan it. I was on quite a kind of a tight time schedule, and minor psychological thrillers, and I just found that it was easier to plan it before I wrote it, because I knew I was going to have to kind of write it reasonably quickly, and I knew it had all these twists in it, a bit like Susie's, and I just had to know where those were going to come. So I like her, I don't always stick to my plan, but I at least like to start with a plan as to where I'm going.
Well, your characters surprise you though, don't they, sometimes? Like you start and you think you're going in a particular direction, and then they don't. There's something abrupt change. And I'm always editing my spreadsheet, and it's not, it's definitely a work in progress type thing.
Yeah, that's the great thing I love about Scrivener, is that you can move the chapters.
I might have to look into that. Yeah,
It's
I'm literally
good.
just dragging lines up and down my spreadsheet, which isn't quite as appealing.
Nikki, when we just talking about planning there, and I know you had given us a really brilliant tip, which was talking about the difference between being a planner and a pantser, and just in terms of, could you kind of explain like what that means to people who might understand those as and also like how I know that you've all kind of said that you start in a spreadsheet, or like have some kind of formula beforehand, but if this is how you kind of see yourselves as writers within that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that writers tend to divide between two camps. You're either a planner and you plan your novel before you write it, or you kind of write by the seat of your pants and you just sit down and start writing, or you can be a mixture kind of thing of the two. And so I do plan now my novels with a spreadsheet. So what I do is my novels tend to be around kind of 90,000 words. So, and on a first draft, they wouldn't be longer than 80. So I kind of take the 80,000 words, work out roughly how many words I'm going to do in a chapter. They tend to be about 1,500 to 2,000 words. So I'll just split that 80,000 words up into chapters, and then I'll kind of overlay my story, if you like, into different cells on that spreadsheet. So however many chapters that you have, I'll then kind of start putting things in to kind of just have a bit of a kind of stand back outline view of where things are going to happen, and I tend to know like either the end maybe or the midpoint, what I'm working towards, something like that, and then there'll just be these big gaps in between to start with, and then I can kind of fill those in gradually. And once I've worked out what my characters are actually like, and what they're going to do, and that does change, because as Victoria and Susie have both said, you think your characters are going in one direction, and then they can often take you somewhere else. But I just find that gives me a kind of structure to hang my book on. And so there's not these massive structural changes, well, if that's the idea anyway, at the end of it, and that, you know, that I can kind of see where I'm going, and I don't have this big hole in the middle of kind of 20,000 words to fill, where you just end up writing about your characters having cups of tea, and, you know, that's about it. So yeah, that's what I do.
Brilliant. Question that's just caught my eye, that was in the Q&A there, that's it kind of follows on a bit, because you're talking, you know, the plan that you've got and what you're working with, but it's a question from Sylvia that says, where do you find inspiration when you get tired or dispirited? What keeps you going through the hard times of being stuck or not knowing where your story goes?
Chocolate.
Alcohol.
I think just like walking away from it and doing something else. I feel like I just go out into nature and go for a long walk, and give myself permission to take a break from it, because I'm not going to write well if I'm not in the zone. So
yeah, there is no misery like feeling like you can't write, though, isn't there? Or feeling like it's not going well and you don't like your writing.
That's true.
Horrible.
I think there's that thing though, isn't there? It's better to have something down to edit than nothing at all. So like, even if it's not a good day, if you chuck something down, you feel slightly better for having something on the page.
Yeah, I was saying, you know, before we started, I was telling the story of how I nearly lost my finger. It's a bit gory, so I won't go back into it. But I couldn't write at all for maybe I guess 6 weeks or so, and it coincided with the first wave of the pandemic. And it's funny because I was just having one of that sort of period of time where I hated my writing. I didn't feel like it was going well, and I was trying to just chuck something down every day. And I look back on it now and think I kind of needed to stop and just take a break from it and go on lots of walks, and just think about it. And I think that it was the first time that I realized that actually there is something in that sometimes you do need to stop, and that writer's block, or whatever you want to call it, is your brain saying it's time to pause for a bit, and that's not necessarily a bad thing.
Yeah.
Agreed.
And also I think getting other people, maybe like trusted readers, sometimes to just read something, you know, a first draft, or, you know, a chapter, or, you know, whatever it is, just to, if they're honest, it's no good if people just say, oh yeah, that's great, because that's not actually very helpful. But if they can kind of tell you what they're thinking about it, or what they can see is wrong with it, or, you know, how it makes them feel about a character, that can sometimes spark something which kind of gets you going again.
Yeah, my agent's awesome, actually. If you get an agent, try and find yourself an agent who is a good editor. Mine is brill. And I sometimes send her like the first 3 chapters of a new book and say, what do you think? And she's fantastic, because as Nikki said, she's honest. She's not just going to say, oh yeah, it's great. You know, she'll say, actually it works, but this isn't quite right, or whatever. We just had a long conversation about whether I should write in first or third for my 3rd book, and lots of backwards and forwards. But she's awesome. So yeah, that's a good tip. If you get an agent, get an editing agent.
Yeah. And prior to that, get a writing group. You know.
Yes.
Yeah. That kind of follows into one of the questions that's come into the chat, actually, about Kaz is asking about a mentor, liking the idea of having a mentor. You've talked also about having trusted people who you would let read your kind of precious first draft or a chapter. I mean, how do you? Who are your kind of, like, if you were advised to like an emerging writer or somebody? What advice would you give in terms of kind of starting to build your writing community? Who would you kind of think would be a good person to ask to read a bit of your writing? Or how would you, who do you have around you as writers, really, as your kind of like trusted allies?
I had a mentor, actually. I did have a mentor who is an established author. I found her on Twitter. She was running a competition. It's a lady called Amanda Reynolds, whose book has actually been on TVs on Sundays at the moment, close to me.
Oh, I'm watching that. That's good.
Yeah, Connie Nielsen and Christopher Eccleston is really good. And before I kind of had an agent or any kind of a deal or anything like that, I've followed a lot of writers, authors on Twitter, and often they will offer to mentor people. It doesn't come up all the time, but if it does, that's what I would say, kind of chuck yourself out there. And you know, people are really generous with their time. You can even approach people, and often, you know, if they have time, they will be unbelievably helpful. I found the writing community, and I think that you will then get an honest opinion. I mean, it's lovely if your husband reads it, or, you know, your sister or your mum or your best friend, but they won't tell you honestly, I don't think, a lot of the time, what's wrong with it. Some are, and some people are really good, but you have to be able to trust them to kind of do that. Whereas if you have somebody who's a bit more dispassionate and hasn't got the emotion invested in upsetting you, not that my mentor ever did, she's absolutely lovely, but she could see things and she was willing to say that about you know, a manuscript, rather than just saying, oh yeah, it's great. So yeah,
it's like writing groups, isn't it? I mean, the Faber course I did, and you'll have had the same at Curtis Brown, was the first time in, I think, a long time since school or uni certainly, that I've written something and people have, you know, openly kind of, you know, gone into it and not torn it apart exactly, but sometimes a bit, and that's really helpful because they don't know you. They're not your mates, they're not invested in you sort of feeling good or worried about upsetting you. So, you know, that's really good way of sort of finding out what works and what doesn't work, what you know, an ordinary reader might think of what you've written. And my book was inspired, you know, by my sister. It's sort of had quite personal a personal perspective content, I guess, and I wanted to know how it will come across, and so I found the feedback I got, because I was writing patients when I did the Faber course, really useful. The other thing I'd say about mentors is Twitter. There's a really nice writing community on Twitter, and even before I had an agent, I had become sort of Twitter friends, I suppose, with Claire McIntosh, who's awesome, and she was really supportive. She asked to see my synopsis and my first 10,000 words. She gave me really good feedback. She gave me really good advice about agents. Yeah, she was grand, basically. She was really lovely, and that really helped. As Nikki said, authors are really generous souls, actually, and far from being competitive with each other, we're all just, I think, just really want to support each other. There's room for all of us, and it's a very difficult industry, so it's nice to have your mates, nice to have people who've got your back.
Yeah, I did Faber too, actually, and I think that as helpful, if not more helpful, I did an online course through Jericho Writers called Self-Edit Your Novel. It's kind of designed for people who've already got a draft, you know, a rough draft. Often it's people who've written a novel and think it's ready to submit, and perhaps they've already submitted it and got rejected. That's the classic rookie error, which I did as well. But I found that course incredibly helpful, so it's worth looking at that.
I heard that one's good.
And then you meet people through that, of course.
Yeah, my Faber course was online, actually, and I think in some respects that probably helped, because we didn't even have to look at each other when we were giving each other feedback.
Yeah, my Curtis Brown was as well. Yeah.
I think it's like what you're saying with the writing group situation. It's like then everyone is in the same boat, that they're, because there's, you know, there can be a sense of feeling vulnerable and not wanting to put yourself out there, but in a group then you're all doing it at the same time, and so it's, you know, you build that trust with each other.
I should say also the other thing about those courses, they can be done at any time, or certainly mine could. So with children, you know, you can do bits and bobs when they're asleep or when they're at nursery or whatever. So you don't actually have to just go and schlep in central London or anything. You can just do it from home in your pajamas.
Yeah, exactly. The whole online thing is actually a godsend, isn't it?
Brilliant. So you want me to do the next question, Ans? Yeah. So you all have mothers in your books in various different guises and whatever, and so the question is about what extent you draw on your own parenting experiences to draw the mothers in your stories. Nikki, can we start with you?
Well, that's a very good question. I think I heard somebody say once that everybody's first novel is partly autobiographical, and I think that that's probably true. I didn't set out for mine to be at all, but I think that I had quite a difficult birth with my well, with both of mine actually, but particularly my second child. She was rather large at 9'9", and I ended up kind of in intensive care and a couple of blood transfusions, and in a bit of a mess for a couple of weeks in hospital, and then still a bit of a mess when I came home. But it was very much kind of physical kind of damage, if you like, with me. But I chose to write about a mother in my first novel who, without completely giving the plot away, she's suffering, but it's kind of it's mental suffering, and I did a lot of research into the condition that kind of goes through the novel. So I think that it probably did have I think it probably had a deep impact on me, I think, having children, and I think that probably kind of came out in my book somehow, but not necessarily reflective of how I felt and how I am as a person. But I think I put a lot of kind of my worries and feelings about it into my book. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think I always start with a bit of me. So my first novel, The Silence, I started with a character called Louisa, who was a mum with a young daughter. And actually, I think that although initially she was quite like me, the book didn't really start to work until I'd kind of given her some attributes that weren't like me, and sort of fictionalized her. She kind of came to life a bit more at that point. I don't think you can't really fully imagine somebody who's just you, can you? Because it's a bit flat on the page if somebody's too much like yourself. And with my book that I'm writing at the moment, again, I've got a mum. She's got a teenage son, and I think that's when I started to feel like I want to write this book, when I was able to put some of that onto the page. But as the drafts went through, she became less and less like me.
With Patience, it's not so much my mothering, but my mum's mothering that's in the book. Patience is about a family, and we have a severely disabled woman called Patience who can't communicate at all, and her family, her mum Louise, dad Pete, and sister Eliza, and they're grown-up daughters, so they're in their 30s. And it's what happens when Patience is given the opportunity of going into an experimental gene therapy trial with the potential of healing her, which is extraordinary. And for it, I mean, it was about Rett syndrome, it was about my sister's disability. Patience is how I imagine my sister might be and what my sister might think. And so Patience's mother, Louise, is in some respects my mum. And I have to say that she's not in others, because when you read the book, Louise has problems that my mum definitely doesn't have. But I interviewed my mum as research for the book, because we were really small when Claire was diagnosed, and I didn't know how she felt. And I learned so much through that process, and so many of the anecdotes that she told me have made it into the book, like the doctor who told her that she was a hysterical mother, neurotic mother, sorry, who should just go home and look after her daughter and stop bothering him, sort of thing. And the time at the hospital where she was in this room full of doctors all on the stage, sort of, talking about my sister's case, trying to work out what she had. And so those are real things. And it was so important to me that went in, because I don't think that carers are spoken about enough. I don't think the effect it has on their mental well-being and physical well-being is discussed enough. And so, like, that act of mothering an adult, actually, and caring for an adult, and my mum still does that now, was so important to me. So that's in. And my second book, Grace, which comes out next summer, is about a mother whose baby is removed at birth, and the woman who wants to adopt the baby, and then a tussle between them. And that was heavily inspired, I guess. Once you've had children, that whole idea of a child being removed from you, or just desperately wanting one, you just know how that feels. It gets you in the gut. So that book, there's a lot of my maternal feelings in that book.
Thank you.
Do you find that with your books, when and they're all very different genres that you write in, and obviously but you were saying, we're talking about some of the motivations or some of the inspiration. Do people when they read your books can think that there's a little bit of them in things like I think that might be a little bit me, and so do people see reflections of themselves in your books at all?
Reflections that aren't there. I don't think I've actually. I sometimes name I name my characters after my friends for fun. Like, not big characters, but random doctors or nurses or shopkeepers are named after my mates, so that if they read it, it's like me checking they've read it. I go, oh yes, you're the shopkeeper. Yeah. Sorry, everyone, carry on.
I think that maybe that was something that I worried about a bit when I was writing, was that what just the general thing of what will people think is the thing that you kind of that stops you sometimes. It wasn't so much that I thought anyone would recognize themselves, but maybe I thought that because I sort of do try and write in quite an emotionally honest way, and sometimes that feels very exposing. But my Faber tutor, Esther Freud, said to us, don't worry about it. The more of yourself that you put into the book, the less people will see you, and the more they will just fall in love with your story and believe your story. And the more self-conscious you are, the less they will do that. So don't worry about that. And she also said that her father, Lucian Freud, the painter, her father read one of her books, which apparently the father in the book was really based on him. Well, that was what she implied. And he said, for a while I thought that the father character might have been me, but then I realized I don't wear a watch. And he just kind of didn't want to see that, and so he didn't. And she said it's interesting how often people just don't realize.
It's true though, isn't it? It's kind of that writing process where you have to kind of let go of the self-consciousness of writing. That I remember when with my first book, just the thought that it's about the first year of parenting after having your first baby, and there's a scene in it where it's the first time having sex after having a baby, and then suddenly just being utterly mortified at the thought of like my dad reading it, and then you have to remember I have more than one audience here, and it's not one person. This is writing, having to kind of get over that kind of already having built a relationship with a reader who actually doesn't exist yet. That's quite a hurdle to overcome sometimes.
I think that thing about characters as well is actually especially when you start, I think when you're doing characterization, it's helpful. It's kind of natural that they're inspired by people because that's how you understand how relationships work and what different people there are in the world, because you've met these people. So I think every person you meet is added to a little catalogue in your brain that you're picking, out of this library, I suppose, character traits and stuff. And as long as you're not, calling them the same thing and giving them the same job and using their same catchphrases, I think certain aspects of their personality, that would be odd if you didn't do that.
But on that, then, that kind of leads on to the question around like how, in terms of, because possibly like Susan and Nikki write like within the same genre, I guess, if you were going to, and Victoria, you write in a different style or different genre. How did you kind of settle on the genres that you wanted to write in? How did that come about? Did you always
know that that's where, like, how you were going to write?
I don't think I did. I think I actually wrote a novel after I left university many years ago, and it was very rubbish, and it's in my loft somewhere, and it won't ever be coming out again. And I think that's partly because I didn't know what genre I wanted to write in, and I think it ended up being a kind of mix of a bit of romance, a bit of kind of thriller, a bit all over the place, really. And I think that it's not until you've kind of got that kind of straight in your head as to what you're trying to do, that you can, that you're ever going to write kind of successfully. I'd love to say that you could write kind of anything, but I think that if you look at the books that are sold, if you want to write a book that kind of gets published, they are in very specific genres, and it's very difficult to write something which bridges genres. I think we all belong to a kind of a debut writing group that was kind of set up when the pandemic started, and if you take all the books in that group, I think kind of 99% of them fit into a particular genre, and there's genres within genres, and that kind of thing. But I think that you have to know what you're writing, because otherwise your editor and the marketing team at your publishers won't know where to put it on a shelf, and that's really important if they think that they can sell
Nikki, I'm not sure that mine is. I don't think I've got. I mean, if there is a genre, I'm told I write book club fiction, but
yeah, that's what I'd say.
Mean anything. So it's like,
yeah,
what is it? But it's Jodie Picoult's been writing them for years, and they sell
yes,
like hotcakes.
And that is her kind of. I would say she's almost a genre in herself, isn't she? Because she's so famous. So it's where your book sits on a shelf is kind of next to someone. I guess like that. It's not ever going to be in the kind of psychological thriller section or the kind of action thriller section. It's just kind of I think it just makes it easier for publishers to know where to put it.
Do you think it's possible to switch genres? So you've got two psychological thrillers. Could you see yourself writing something completely?
I mean,
different?
I can't at the moment, but people do it, and they do it. I mean, take Claire McIntosh. She's written fantastic thrillers, and she's also written very kind of emotional books. But I think that when you're starting off, I think that your editor and your publisher tend to want to kind of develop you, I guess, as a kind of brand, and they'll want you to kind of stick to a similar genre so that you can build up your readers and they know what they're going to kind of expect.
Yeah, I sent a book 3 idea to my agent recently, and she said she really liked it, but she wasn't sure if it was a bit too much of a divergence for what I'm known for. And I said, what am I known for? I've only published one book. I've got another one in the pipeline. I honestly don't know. But I suppose I thought it was along the same lines of what I've been writing, and I think that whatever I write will end up being a kind of character-driven, dark, mystery, crimey sort of book. Whatever I write will end up being that. That's just the groove that I settle into.
Yeah, with me, been a journalist for a long time, and I'm fascinated by issues. There are certain issues that I've written about them, they stick in my head and they don't go away. And so for me, the groove I'm in is that. So I grab hold of this big issue and I look into it, and then I tell that story through humans involved in that story, involved in that drama, and so that's quite natural for me too, I think. But I do know, thinking about other authors, some authors write in several genres but with different names, which is one way of getting around that's not what you're known for thing. So
true.
I sort of have a vague idea for a crime novel in the back of my head, but I sort of wish that I might sort of try and write on the quiet and not tell anyone, not show anyone, and see if it's any good.
You've told us now, though.
Oh no.
Do you read in your genre as well? Just thinking, like, in terms of for writers who are starting out, and we all know that about to be a writer you need to be a reader as well. But do you read broadly across lots of different genre, or do you read? What would your advice be to kind of like, if somebody like has an idea for a crime story, would you say devour loads of crime stories, or do you what's your advice kind of like for being a reader as well as a writer?
I would say yes. I don't know what the others will say, but I would say yes, definitely read your genre. You have to understand it, and you have to understand what's out there to try and, I guess, A, improve your own writing, and B, so that you're not duplicating something completely which is already out there. You know, you might think you've had the most brilliant idea, but if somebody else has written something exactly the same, then it's going to be a much harder sell. So from that kind of side of things, I would say yes, absolutely, definitely. But I don't know what Susan and Victoria do, but when I'm writing, I can't read too much of the genre then that I can't read in my genre, because I will tend to try and start wanting to write like whoever I'm reading.
You mimic.
And I will end up mimicking them, and then it all goes horribly wrong. So
yeah, you absorb it, don't you? You absorb the voice, and
Do.
yeah, there's a passage of my book that I'm currently working on, that I remember exactly what I was reading when I wrote that. I was reading A Little Life, you know, I've forgotten the author's name,
Hanif Qureshi,
yeah. And I was editing it the other day going, God, this just sounds really self-indulgently miserable. And I remembered that.
Yes, I wrote a lovely prologue after I'd just read Anna Bailey's Tall Bones, which I absolutely loved. I have to say, I absolutely loved it. But yeah, I had to come back and scrap the whole thing, because it was just like, this isn't me.
You were just doing an Anna Bailey.
I have to say, I read a lot of
failing. Yeah.
I definitely read cross genre as well, though. Like I do love crime novels, and I you know, I'm really keen sort of reader of thrillers and stuff, things that I don't write but love anyway. And I think it's kind of good. I agree with Nikki totally about understanding the market and the kind of books that you're writing, and that's really important. But also, yeah, I mean, if you're going to mimic, actually, it'd be good if you've got that sort of, you know, a broad selection of different writing styles in your head. So yeah, I do. I read all sorts, from, you know, sort of sagas and commercial fiction to sort of, you know, Booker nominated books and everything in between, because I think,
yeah, and everything is helpful, even if it's just to find, okay, this is what I don't want to do,
what you don't like.
Yeah.
So, we've got a question that's around advice for kind of people who are starting out writing, and so it's there's a couple of different parts of it. So it's kind of what do you think the pitfalls are that people starting out fall into, and which kind of goes with a question that we've had in the Q&A that says, did you start out writing for others to read your stories? So did you write in order to be published, or were you writing for yourself in the beginning? So it's kind of, yeah, a bit of a two-parter there. Susan, can you start us off with that?
So I think the pitfall that people probably fall into is thinking that their book is finished when it's not. And I think I mentioned earlier, I've done that, we've all done that. You've really got to sit with it and edit it and go back over it, you know, again and again and again before submitting. And I think that sorry, was the other question, where would you start? Or
when you started off, did you start off in order to be published, or were you writing more for yourself?
I told myself that I would write a book. That was my goal. I'm going to write a novel. At some point, I allowed myself to hope that maybe I would be published, but it seemed like a very remote, far off goal, especially as I remember it was during that period when Kindle seemed to be threatening the publishing industry, and it seemed to have somehow become almost impossible even to get an agent. Everything was all over the shop for a while, and I just allowed myself to not really worry about it too much and just keep going. But there came a point where, you know, I desperately wanted to be published. And by the time I was, you know, doing the courses that I mentioned in the retreats, that was kind of my goal by that point.
Brilliant. Nikki?
Yes, I would completely echo what Susie says in terms of when you're starting out. I think that thinking it's finished when it's not, and I would say that if you are going to approach agents, that's you can only do it once, and so it's really, 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 really important that you kind of give them your best shot, really. And if you go too early and it's a bit rubbish still, then you've just wasted that opportunity, and you've got to write a whole new book. And so it's actually a lot easier just to spend another kind of 2 or 3 months editing it, and getting it to the best that it can be, rather than having to spend another kind of 2 or 3 years writing an entirely new one. I think, yeah, we've all made that error. And I think that the other thing maybe I'd say is not planning maybe enough, is just having that brilliant idea that you think is brilliant anyway, and just kind of jumping in there without really kind of taking the time to think it through, and really get to know your characters. Because if you don't know them and you can't kind of describe them and feel that they could come and sit down in a room with you, then your readers won't feel them either. So yeah, that would be my tips. And as for whether I think I was probably a bit like Susan, that I started off writing thinking that I was definitely going to finish a novel because it was something that I'd wanted to do. And I had done it before. I'd done it once after I left university. I knew I could do it, but I wanted to make it better this time. And then I kind of started going on courses and things like that, and thinking maybe this is something that I could do, kind of thing. So yeah.
From my point of view, I've been a journalist, obviously, and used to having my words published, but only really short ones, like short-term pieces and stuff. And I just decided, I had the classic kind of almost approaching midlife crisis, and thought, I just need to write this book that I've had in my head for so long, and I have to do it. I'm going to do it for myself. And but I did, and I suppose I set off just hoping, there's that niggle, you don't even want to tell anyone, but I just really hope it might get published. But I don't know, it's probably rubbish, but I'll just try anyway. And so I kept going, and it was amazing to me when I got where I did. In terms of mistakes, I think, as well as all of the fabulous things that Susan and Nikki pointed out, basically just going too early. I think there were some practical things like not knowing how to lay out a manuscript, which will piss off agents. You've got to make sure that it's all done properly. There are lots of online resources that tell you how to do that. Things like putting masses of backstory in the first chapter. That's a really common error that lots of new writers do, and I did it. My first draft, I think, is terrible of pages.
I did it. Yeah.
Yes. We've all done it. I've learned that lesson now. And then dotting around from different people's heads in the same chapter, which some books do. And I've just read a Jack Frost crime novel set, in the 80s, where he did, the novelist who wrote that, and I can't remember what his name was, he kept jumping it within chapters into different heads.
Chucky Bain jumps around like that as well. If you can do it,
tends to do that now.
I can't do it.
It's not common, and agents don't tend to like it, and so that's another thing to try and avoid.
Brilliant, thank you. I think that's some really brilliant tips there for everybody. So we're about at the end of the time now, and sorry, were you going to say something, Hannah?
Sorry, no, I was just going to say the same as well. I hadn't realised how quickly it had gone. I thought we had, but yeah, it's been so wonderful speaking with you all. The time's just completely run away with us. So yes, just to let you know that, well, first off, can we just have a kind of a live and round of applause for your, thank you all so much for joining us this evening. It's been absolutely fascinating to listen to all of your experiences, and thank you for being so generous with your thoughts and with your time and with your experience. We have 2 more panel events coming up. We have one on the 9th of December, and that's around writing life balance, and another one on the 18th of January, and that one is around finding inspiration as well. You can sign up to both of those now. You can find the links through our website. We'll email everybody else afterwards and send you a link to it. We've got social media as well, so if people would like to, please sign up to our mailing list, and we can let you know about everything that's going on. And also we'd just like to thank our funders, the Arts Council, and also our partner in this project as well, New Writing South. And again, biggest thanks to our fantastic writers, Susan Allott, Nikki Smith and Victoria Scott. Thank you.
Thank you.